As I say, my name is Tom Deacon. I'm a partner at Barker Associates. We've been working extensively across the schools and academies sector for the last 10 years or so, and certainly over the last 2 to 3 years, focusing heavily on low carbon solutions and decarbonisation. And with the increased momentum, partly fueled by government initiative, but also the more recent funding put into the marketplace by Salex through the Department for Business, Environment and Industrial Strategy, there's a real focus and for the first time some significant funding available to support decarbonisation across the public sector. During this session, we're going to focus purely on the Low Carbon Skills Fund, and I'll talk in more detail around what that's all about, eligibility and the process, etc. But as Barker, we've been working extensively on overall decarbonisation, and you know, clearly it's a must do for public sector clients. Just by way of introduction to this particular fund. This was launched by BEIS, the Department for Business, Enterprise, Industrial Strategy, and will be delivered via Salex Finance, and was launched on the 21st of July. The overall funding pot that was or has been allocated for this specific round is 15 million, of which listening to feedback from the sector, and having launched this just as schools were about to finish teaching for the summer holidays, they've ring-fenced £3.5 million this year for specifically for schools and academies. Now, the first round, the 11.5 million that was ring-fenced, was actually oversubscribed by over 3 times, and that oversubscription occurred in the first few days. They were actually over the 11.5 million pounds within around 10 hours of the portal opening last time out. So this is the second time we've run this particular webinar. The first time we hadn't seen the portal hadn't opened to any public sector body. We've decided to run this session with a combination of many of you who I don't believe joined the first session, and therefore may be relatively new to LCSF, Low Carbon Skills Fund 2, but also for those clients who perhaps did join the first session. We now know more about the process. We now know that, as expected, it will be a hotly competitive funding round. So we have built on the original presentation we did back at the end of July, early August, to add in more information, and hopefully you'll find it useful. So in terms of the parameters of the funding, I'll come on to in more detail. This is the second round of the Low Carbon Skills Fund. Some of you may have applied and maybe have successfully secured money for the Low Carbon Skills Fund 1, and following that may well have secured money for the for projects, capital projects, which was the purpose of PSDS, or Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme. They've run 2 rounds of that capital fund and for PSDS, and the Low Carbon Skills Fund is the second round for the skills element. Just for complete clarity, and this question has come up an awful lot from clients, and indeed on the Salex webinars we've sat in ourselves, is there's a clear delineation, and the purpose between the 2 funds is very separate. Low Carbon Skills Fund is there to allow public sector bodies to secure the support of organisations to undertake the professional work, design, cost modelling, etc., in order to prepare for projects to commence. So Low Carbon Skills Fund does not fund the physical work itself, but is an enabler to kickstart some of those projects where hitherto funding would not have been available. So that's Low Carbon Skills Fund. PSDS, or Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, is for the physical implementation of low carbon measures. In PSDS 1, Barker, we supported a series of clients. We delivered over 180 individual projects, and that was delivered, and they covered a whole gamut of projects from solar PV to LED lighting to boiler controls to insulation works to window replacement, etc. A whole very broad range of decarbonisation or projects that will support decarbonisation of the estate, both in terms of reducing electricity consumption and requirement, but also reducing gas and heat load. So this round of LCSF is for the front end support. PSDS is for the delivery of the projects thereafter, and obviously significantly more money involved. The difference between Low Carbon Skills Fund 1 and this round, Low Carbon Skills Fund 2, is this has become very focused on decarbonisation of heat. And no doubt a lot of you will have seen a lot of in the market. A lot of information coming out from central government and indeed global organisations around the huge impact that heating of buildings has on our nation's carbon footprint, and therefore what was a rather broader funding eligibility or funding focus in LCSF and PSDS 1, LCSF 2, and we expect, although we don't know, future rounds of PSDS for the projects will focus very much around heat decarbonisation. We don't know if there's going to be a PSDS 3. There are rumours, and Salex have already started to engage with certain supply chain partners to gauge capacity in the market to support projects. There are a lot of skill shortages and issues at the moment, which are again well publicised in the press. But we are expecting, we do think that there will be a PSDS 3. So as it stands, this particular funding round is to support the development of heat decarbonisation plans, and I'll come on to that more in a moment, which will act as a primer and give information to public sector bodies to help them on their decarbonisation journey, and hopefully identify projects that could well be funded by PSDS or indeed other means. So, has anybody got any questions before we move on from this specific section? Either raise your hand or pop something in the chat, by all means.
There's nothing on the chat as yet, Tom.
No problem. No problem. Okay, so I'm just going to touch on eligibility now for the fund. As I've already suggested, this is for maintained and academy schools, and at the moment there is a specific round which has been ring fenced. That's £3.5 million worth of funding that schools and academy and maintained schools are eligible to bid for. I'll come on to timescale shortly. There is critically an additionality criteria, which essentially means that if your project, if you already had funding for heat decarbonisation plans from other means, then you're not able to bid for funding for this on this occasion. And the commitment required as part of the application is that you commission, complete, undertake and issue to Salex your completed heat decarbonisation plans by March next year, March 2022. There are no minimum or maximum values. However, this is a highly competitive situation, and for those who have joined more recently and maybe missed the first few minutes of the session, the first round that was opened up in July was oversubscribed by over 3 times, and the original £11.5 million was secured within the first 10 hours or so of the bid of the portal opening. So highly competitive. And on that basis, the advice we've been sharing with some of our existing clients and indeed new clients who have approached us to support on this fund is really you need to be looking at prioritising heating systems and buildings with heating systems that are at the end of their economic life or indeed have failed. And the reason being is that a heat decarbonisation plan, first and foremost, is there to explore, identify and test the viability of alternative heating solutions within buildings, moving away from fossil fuel, whether that be oil or gas, and on to more sustainable solutions, which is effectively electric heating or ground source heat pump type solutions. So the focus, therefore, with such a competitive environment for funding, our view is that if across your portfolio of schools you have specific sites which are due to or will require boiler replacement or heat source replacement in the not too distant future, they're the ones where you ought to be focusing on what is the alternative to a conventional gas boiler replacement. And please be aware, although this says heating, that isn't just space heating of rooms, it equally would include hot water generation as well, which certainly if those amongst you have swimming pool facilities or even large sporting facilities with lots of hot water demand, then there could well be some significant projects there available that could be eligible. So it's around looking at basically removing your need for or reducing your need for gas supplied heating or hot water. So as I said, just to reiterate, if you've got, let's say, I don't know, 20 buildings, you could, and there's nothing to say that you can't bid to undertake heat decarbonisation plans for all of those buildings, and if that's something you'd like to consider, then by all means, we're not saying don't do that at all. However, with the limited amount of funding, we feel that a bid may well be stronger if you can articulate within the bid that you've prioritised those sites where you've got an immediate or almost immediate need to start to replace those systems and clearly we should be looking at low carbon options as an alternative. So, in terms of the information required, the bid process, the bid forms are actually relatively straightforward. It's not copious, and once you've got all the information, it probably only takes an hour or so to complete. But ahead of that, and obviously bearing in mind it is going to be highly competitive this round, there's quite a bit of information that needs to be gathered in the next week in this instance, because the portal goes live on the 13th, which is a week today. A lot of it is basic information, and I would imagine you will have most of this on file already. But you will need to have already gathered, obviously, approval from your authorising official. You'll need to have details of who's going to lead the project. You'll need to have all the details of the schools that will be part of the bid. So if you decide to do all of your sites or some of your sites, or maybe even one site, or if you're a single site organisation, but you will need your URN, your UK property reference number, which again is all available online, your GIFA, your gross internal floor area, and also existing emission data, either from your energy provider, or if you have to complete streamlined energy carbon reporting returns, that kind of information. You'll also need to be able to articulate in fairly concise terms what your current plans for decarbonisation and energy strategy are, and also what your future strategy is, clearly subject to funding, but what are your current plans in place and what are your aspirations? They're the two sections that will probably require a little bit more writing, and obviously you could start to think about those ahead of the portal being opened, and I'll come onto the portal shortly. Picking up the earlier point around condition, whilst you're not specifically required to issue condition information, having gone through a selection process, perhaps why you've selected certain boilers or certain sites, for example, to start to articulate to Salex that you have clearly thought and already done a prioritisation session, and you're bidding for the sites and buildings where the need is the greatest, would be our suggestion. So I'm just going to pause for a second to see if anybody's got any questions, I can't see anything in the chat. Nor do we have anything in the chat?
No, nothing that I can see.
Okay, no problem. Fine. So I'll move on then if that's okay. So in terms of the application process, as before, all of the Salex bids that have been undertaken through Low Carbon Skills Fund and Public Sector Decarbonisation have been via the Salex Portal. The portal opened to everybody back on the 28th of July. That round is now closed. However, as a school or academy, you are able to bid, and that next window of opportunity opens next Monday on the 13th of September. We don't know what time the portal is going to open. Last time it was just after lunch, and we're hoping for a similar update on that this week as to when it will actually open. As with the previous Low Carbon Skills Fund round, it is on a first come first served basis. If your application is rejected and there is still funding available, you will be given the opportunity to reapply. Rather than SIF or other similar funding rounds where all of the bids are put in, assessed and then announced, these are actually awarded on a rolling basis, so 3 to 4 weeks to go through the analysis within Salex, and then they will issue what they call a grant offer letter if your bid is successful, which then allows you to instruct your team to go away and start work on the heat decarbonisation plans. And as I said earlier, they need to be completed by the 31st of March next year. If you haven't got a Salex login already into the portal, strongly recommend, if you're considering bidding, get that done now. And likewise, given the fact that the portal will open and we're expecting the fund to go very quickly, then clearly it's around getting as much information in advance in order to allow you to complete your application as swiftly as possible. Okay, so I've covered off some of this already. These are our sort of recommendations around next steps. Clearly time is of the essence given the fund is opening next week, but obviously register with Salex as I've suggested. You need to consider your bid strategy. So as I've already suggested, have a good think around the nature of your estate, those where you perhaps got boilers within your future works plans or SCA plans for the upcoming year or 2 years, and possibly to consider focusing your bid around that. You will have to complete the application online, at which point they will want to know more about your wider energy strategy. Some of our clients have actually got quite evolved energy strategies already, and there is the opportunity to upload those as evidence. It's not essential or mandatory, but again, it would certainly enable Salex to have a better understanding. However, there is an acceptance that the whole purpose of this type of fund is because different organisations are at different stages of their journey, and therefore, some might be only taking this might be the first step towards articulating their decarbonisation. But if you do have more information, whether it be a policy or perhaps a full energy strategy, then obviously there's opportunity to complete that. Bit of a typo, it says follow-up webinar on the 6th of September, that's this one, obviously. There's some email addresses there if you feel that you've got any further questions, or you feel like you need some support in compiling your low carbon skills fund. We're working at the moment across about 20 different organisations to support them with their low carbon skills fund bids. What I would say is this week's going to be incredibly valuable time, and really our recommendation is that you have a draft of the application ready to go, and we can support with that if required. That you've got sign off from your authorising official, if that's not yourself, to make sure that you press the button when you need to press the button. You've got the authorisation to do so, but also you're ready and you've got all the information ready to go, so that as soon as the portal opens, you can complete your application and submit. It sounds quite scary, but actually the form isn't too taxing, as long as there's a bit of front end work that needs to be done over the next few days. So just as a bit of a follow on, I've just got a few screenshots here from the Salex portal. We've already obviously had sight of some of the questions and the way the portal looks like. And for those that are interested, we can certainly support by sharing some of that information. So this is the Salex portal. Obviously, you can phase 2 public sector low carbon skills fund is signposted, and as you can see, there's a lot more information here about how it all works. There is also a few. There's a whole section on guidance. So what is a heat decarbonisation plan? We've got a lot of questions coming from clients to say, well, what is this for? What does it include? So there's some good information there which talks about that. And then this is where you would then go into the portal and be able to actually submit that. Now, this was a screen grab taken when the portal opened last time. This just says, not open yet, or something like that. But effectively, this is the way in. And then once you get in, obviously there's lots of big data and various other sections you'll need to complete, which we've not included all of the screenshots on this presentation, but if you like our support to help, then by all means we can certainly have that dialogue. A lot of that is highly specific to yourselves, so hence why we haven't necessarily shared here. But then most importantly, there's a piece here around signing off, but also getting your authorising official signature, or if your authorisation official is not available, you can sign on their behalf, as long as they can send a separate email to Salex given their consent. So this was a question that was raised on a previous Salex webinar. At the time, it was obviously holiday season. It may still be the case for some of your authorising officials as well. So as a workaround to allow applications to go in, they've said, fine, if it's signed on behalf of, then there needs to be a separate written email goes into Salex to confirm with the application reference number that this is authorised. Again, that might be something that you can arrange this week ahead of the portal opening next week. So that's the end of the presentation.